Hey, this is Matt with Minis of Maine, and today we're going to take a look at an AEM cold air intake for the Generation 2 Mini. So this is a 2014 Mini Cooper Clubman. It's an R55S, and this was actually a what's called a Green Park edition, and it came with these like beige and green stripes on the sides. And it also came with green and beige bonnet stripes. And then the interior has got this nice cream colored accent that runs throughout. You can see on the doors it's got the cream colored accents. It's kind of unique. And then this car's been modded up, so it's got Konig 17-inch Runlite wheels, and it also has a Quicksilver exhaust from the downpipe back. The second cat has been removed, and the resonator is still in. Has an AEM air filter, cold air intake with the scoop modified. And then I put some drilled rotors on just for looks. Painted the calipers, of course. And I've also had a increased capacity intercooler. I put a larger Wagner on, and then also the turbo blanket. And the Green Park was kind of neat because it had this green roof. Sometimes it looks black. It's got a nice little spoiler on the rear. See if you can capture the green color. Some photos it definitely comes out black, so. So right now, with the NM module and the exhaust and the intake and the larger intercooler, this is a pretty it's a pretty quick little car. Not really sure what it's putting out horsepower wise, but I can tell you it's pretty quick for sure. So I just did an install of an air intake on a 3rd generation Mini. My 2017 F56S, and a couple people wrote to me and asked me about the cold air intake that I had put on my Gen 2 Mini. It's a 2014 Clubman R55S. So I decided to just take a look at the unit that's on that car and talk a little bit about cold air intakes for Gen 2 Minis. So one of the things to think about when looking at cold air intakes for the Gen 2 Minis, the S-Series cars used 2 motors. So from 2007 to about mid-2011, the cars used an N14 motor. Then from about mid-2011 and up, they used an N18 motor. Now the N18 motor is just a slightly massaged version of the N14, and they tried to improve a few things. So when you're looking at the motors, the best way to really tell the difference between the two, whether it's an N14 or an N18, is just open the hood and look at the motor, because some people get confused. It's just easier to look at the motor and explain what you've got. So the N18 motor uses this decorative cover right here. So you can see it covers the spark plug modules that are under this cover. This cover literally just pops off the front, and then the modules are underneath. The N18 also takes the wiring for the spark plug coil assemblies that are under here, and it routes them to the back of the motor. So you can see these 2 strips through here, and I'll pop this cover. So the cover pops off and you can see your spark plug modules there, and then the wires scale back to the rear of the motor. Now in the N14 motor, it's really very evident because this cover's not in place. And then the spark plugs in the modules, they come to the front of the motor and they divert from the front. So it's a really easy way to tell whether you have an N14 or whether you have an N18. Now it's going to matter because the AEM unit is specific for N18 motors or N14 motors. The other thing that's important to know is if you decide to do an intercooler upgrade, you're going to want to make sure you know which motor you have as well, because the inlets are slightly different outlaid. So when I started modifying this Mini, I had a game plan in mind, and I started with some bits and pieces, putting it together, doing a little bit of research on the different components I wanted to add. And one of the things that I knew I was going to do was a cold air intake for sure. So what I've done for this car so far is I've added in the NM power module, and what this does is just gives you a little bit more torque, a little bit more power, but it's still maintains some reliability. I added in a larger intercooler in the front from Wagner, and then I also added in the AEM intake, as well as I did a Quicksilver exhaust with a second cat delete, and I also took out the resonator initially. I did put the resonator back in because I was getting a lot of drone. So one of the nice things about the AEM unit is it takes the standard hood scoop, and which is non-functional in the Gen 2 cars, and it actually makes it a functional hood scoop. You pull the hood scoop out, you take out the blank, and then what I did is I got a little metal grill from Mini Finney throughout motoring. I put that in, and then underneath the hood assembly, this whole entire AEM unit gets plugged in, just the standard holes that are on the bottom of the hood. And then what it's doing is it's pulling air from the front hood scoop down through this ram air device, and then it goes right into the tops of the air filter. So you're getting a lot of air directly into the air box from above through the scoop. Now the other thing that's nice about the AEM unit is it continues to use this inlet in front. So right near the driver's side headlight, you've got the stock intake snorkel, and what it's doing is it's pulling air from the grill in this area behind the hood, so it's getting cooler, fresher air, and what it's doing is it's pulling it up into the stock snorkel, which still maintains in place, which goes into the bottom of the AEM airbox. So you're getting air from below and you're getting your air from above. And when you've done mods like exhaust mods, tuning module mods, and other type of engine mods, you're going to want to get more air into the motor, and the AEM does a really good job. So the functional air scoop was a really big selling feature for me when I looked at the AEM. The other nice thing about the AEM unit is it is still a closed cold air intake. So what this new box is doing is it's pulling fresh air from outside the engine bay, and it's not taking any air from the heated engine bay for the car. So you're getting a lot of cool, fresh, direct air into the intake, which is great. The other thing that's really nice about the intake is it's all made out of thermoplastic. So all of the fittings, all of the tubing, it's all plastic as well as the scoop. Now the nice thing about the thermoplastic is it's really good at dissipating heat. Some of the other intakes on the market are made out of metal, and they tend to get pretty hot. You get some heat sink issues with them. One of the other really nice features of the AEM unit is the air filter element that it's using is a dry air filter. When you're looking at cold air intakes for Mini Coopers, there's usually two types. Either there's a dry filter or there's an oiled filter. So whether to go for a dry filter or an oiled filter, they both have pros and cons. The advantage to the oiled filter is they're really good at capturing dirt and small particulate. The only problem with the oiled filter is you can see where the air filter assembly is here, And very close by in the induction path is you have the mass airflow sensor that's here. Some tuners don't really like the oiled filters because as you start getting increased flow with an oiled filter, occasionally those oiled filters, if they're not oiled correctly, they can foul up the air sensor, and you'll get some check engine lights and some unusual readings. The dry filter is an advantage in that regard, in that you're not getting the oil getting pushed into the induction path. Now the problem with the dry filter is, while it flows a lot of air really efficiently, it also doesn't clean the air super well, not as good as an oiled filter. So you really want to keep them clean. About every 5,000 miles you want to wash them out real thoroughly, and then you also just want to make sure you're maintaining your oil regularly as well. Now one of the aspects of the AEM cold air intake that I didn't like was they use a metal heat shield that gets installed right above the turbo unit. And one of the concerns I had is, as I started talking to a couple of different tuners that were using them and a couple of people who own minis, is when they installed that metal heat shield, it was causing a lot of melting and a lot of damage on the front of the valve cover right in through here and underneath. It's causing a lot of damage that was going to need to be repaired. So I started looking around about options for cooling and just protecting that area. And a couple of tuners had recommended putting in a turbo blanket in place of the metal heat shield and the aftermarket AEM heat shield. Now the nice thing about the turbo blanket is it does kind of kills two birds with one stone. So it does a really great job of managing heat underneath the engine compartment. The other thing that it does is it really protects this front area from being melted due to the poor design of that heat shield. The other thing it does is it gives you a performance advantage because it helps speed up the air through the turbo. Turbo spools a little quicker, and it's just a much more efficient way to run the turbo, especially when you do like an intercooler upgrade, increase the size of that. It just helps give you a little bit more power, better breathability. Now one of the questions I get a lot from people when they see the intake and they see how it's set up is, a lot of people ask about rain. What's it like driving in rain? Doesn't it flood up with water? Don't you have some water intrusion issues with the intake? And when I first got it and I first installed it, I have to admit I had a little bit of concern. I wasn't really sure that what I was reading was really correct. So the first few times I drove it in light rain, I'd pop the hood and I'd take a look to see what kind of water ingress was going on, and I wasn't really seeing much. The more I drove it and the more comfortable I got with how it was performing in the rain, what would happen is I'd drive for a few hours for work and pop the hood and look, and usually what I would see, especially after a few hours of driving, is you'll see some water accumulation in through here, some water vapor. Occasionally, after a few hours, you'll see some water on the inside here, right around this filter area. It gets a little damp, but it doesn't get exceptionally wet at all. Sometimes you can't even really tell if it's wet or not, and you can feel inside the airbox unit. The other thing you can do is you can kind of look down inside the airbox unit, and I've never seen any puddling of water, and I've never seen really any major accumulation of water in the intake. So I'm pretty confident after many hours and many miles in rain that you're going to be safe from any water intrusion.